Hi friends, and welcome to this series on art and culture. Art and culture has become an integral part of UPSC syllabus. You would find around 3 to 4 questions in your prelim exam and almost around 1 to 2 questions in your main exam, right? So from the beginning 2011, art and culture is becoming more and more important, and you have to cover it in much more detail to secure good marks in your UPSC exam. So let's begin this series. In today's lecture, we would understand what constitutes art and culture. So agenda of today's lecture would be understanding culture, understanding various forms of arts, and factors influencing art. So in this lecture, you would not find anything factual at all, right? Because we have to firstly understand what these terms are and what are we going to study in these chapters, in coming few chapters. We have to actually make a framework so that things become easy for us to learn and to remember, right? So with that, let's begin our journey in art and culture, right? So let's first understand what is culture. So question is, what is culture? So a simple definition of culture is this. Culture is nothing but the ideas, customs and social behavior of a particular group of individuals, right? So for example, India has a particular culture, America has some different culture. Even if you think about a smaller group, right? For example, if you think about your college guys, right? Your college guys might have a particular culture. For example, in DU, St. Stephen guys have a particular culture, SRCC guys have a particular culture, because again the culture is very much dynamic and it's in flux, right? So the ideas vary, the customs vary, and all these things actually constitutes culture. So we say that in India there are multiple cultures, right? So from if we move from one land to another or from one city to another, the culture changes altogether. So culture is basically the underlying theme of a particular place, or an underlying theme or the way people are living in that particular society, right? So ideas, customs and social behaviors actually constitutes the way people are living. Now the next important question is how culture is formed. So simple, there are some ideas, there are some customs which form culture, right? But then there are factors which we have to look at to see what constitute a culture. Firstly, the most important factor is natural conditions and geography of a place. So if you observe, a desert has altogether a different culture from a hilly area, right? When I say culture, I would say the way of living. So the housing, the structure of houses there, and the way their food is, the way they are dressed up, it's entirely different, right? Similarly, if you see a place which is an island place, right? So the food of that place would be very different from a plain, right? So if you compare Japan with maybe Punjab, the food is entirely different, right? So there would be lots of seafood in Japan or Goa, but there is a lot of agricultural food products in Punjab or in plains of Uttar Pradesh and so on. So geography of a place actually influences a culture a lot. Similarly, if you look at the dressing, right? Kashmiris dress very differently from maybe Himachalis, right? Both of them are hilly areas, but the gradient of slope is different. So the colder the area, the thicker the dresses are, right? Similarly, if you go down south, the dresses would become very simple and plain Jane cotton, right? A cotton shirt or a cotton dhoti or something like that. So natural conditions and geography of a place actually influence culture to a large extent, right? So second is development of society, right? So if you look at in history, we are moving from prehistoric to historic to medieval to modern times, and now I would say it's ultra modern time, and you would see the culture is entirely different, right? So during the prehistoric times, human beings were living in caves and they were dwelling in small tribes. The culture was entirely different, right? The culture was more of hunting and all that stuff, right? The culture was to build small caves or build small huts, right? And then it migrated to city life, then to bigger cities, and now we can see there are metropolitans. So development of society, and when I say development of society, so development of science and technology as well plays an important role. For example, during the prehistoric time, man used to use stone tools, right? So the culture was very different. There were very few pet animals, but when man started using iron and other metals, the culture became very different. Agriculture came into existence, and then pets and rearing of animals also came into the culture. So development of society and science and technology plays an important role in formation of culture. Third would be religious beliefs, right? So if you look closely into any society, right, you would see that religion forms a very basis of the culture of that society, right? So again, if you look at India in prehistoric times, there were pagan worship, right? So the culture was actually around pagan worship. People were worshipping the forces of nature. Then there were then they migrated to maybe idol worships. Then again there was building of temples and all that stuff happening. So religious beliefs actually influence the culture, right? So the way people are living, for example, in a society where there were varnas in Indian society, people were living where the priest was the head of the society at that time. So again, religious beliefs form very core of a culture of a society, and they influence culture to a very large extent. Next would be social structures. As I have mentioned that we used to have varnas and ashram dharmas, so that actually formed a very essential part of Indian culture. So Indian culture was divided into, for example, ashram. So everyone has a fixed duty. A person who is less than 25 years of age was a brahmachari, and so on and so forth. So the culture was very much systematic and very much fixed, right? So these divisions now have been faded away, and you see now these days the division of society is very different, right? So there the brahmacharya or the study period might extend for somebody to 30 years or 35 years. The marriages are delayed and all that stuff is happening. So the social structure actually influences the culture of a society, right? Or we can say that culture influences the social structures as well. So it's both ways, right? Similarly, again, another example which we can take here is how do we interact with our elders, right? So in India, we used to have a lot of respect for our elders, right? So we used to have a joint family system. But in Western countries, the social respect or respect for the elders were not very great, right? So there was a trend of nuclear families and all that stuff. So social structures actually tell you what kind of family structure was there and what kind of interactions were there between the individuals of a particular society. Then lastly, media and communication, right? So you might think that media and communication is just new thing, right? It's a new fad because TV and all that stuff is just dominating in the present century. But if you look clearly, there was a communication channel, right? For example, Ashok communicated Buddhism to different parts of this world, right? So those where there was communication of Buddhism, the culture formed was entirely different from those places where there was no communication of Buddhism. Similarly, when Kushanas came to India, they influenced the paintings and arts. So there was a communication, right? You can say that it was because of attacks or something like that, but essentially it was through the communication channels, right? So media and communication also plays essential part to form a culture of a society, right? So these are basic tenets on which a culture of a society can be defined, right? Geography, first of all, is very important. Secondly, what phase of development the society is at. Secondly, what kind of religious beliefs are held by the society. Fourth, the social structures, and fifth, media and communication, right? Now with this understanding, let's try to understand what is our culture. So what is the culture of metro cities like Gurgaon and Mumbai, right? So you would see basically nuclear families. You can say there is a weekend culture, right? Lots of us talk about weekend culture. Then there is a nightlife. Eating out has become a culture. So plays are there, movies are there, flexible hours of job, right? MNCs. So we very frequently come across a term called MNC culture, right? So MNC by after 1991, MNCs have developed in India, and now there is MNC culture in these metro cities, right? Now if we compare it with a small village in Himachal Pradesh, what is the culture there, right? So there would be joint families, there would be terrace farmings and works on the fields. Then there, because it's still a farming community, there would be festival related to harvest. So then the culture is to preserve food for winter months, because in winter the production is very low, and because of too much cold people cannot work. And finally there would be folk plays and folk dances, right? There are other features of the culture as well, but this is just to showcase that how different these two cultures are, even within a country, even within a same country, right? So how a person is living in a place, how the geographical conditions are, and all that stuff greatly influence the culture of that particular place. So if, for example, in your main exam you are given a question to analyze a particular culture, or to understand an art form of a particular culture, or to maybe generally comment on a particular culture, how do you go about it? So it's simple. If we work on basic few tenets, we would be able to answer, and we would be able to formulate a good answer. Firstly, we have to look at the livelihood options. So what are our basic work? We have to look at that. Then we have to look at our leisure time. How do we spend our free times? What are our activities of free creation? So for example, in Gurgaon, that might be a movie going, that might be watching a play, or that might be social interactions, going to pubs and bars. Whereas in Himachal Pradesh, it might be folk songs, it might be dancing around fire and all that stuff, right? So that it would help us understand the culture. The third would be social interactions, right? How do we communicate with different members of society, right? So if we understand that, we would be able to actually decipher culture of a particular place. For example, in a village in maybe Rajasthan, there would be culture, there would be a social interaction in which Shudras are not allowed to drink water from a particular well or something like that. So we can actually point down what kind of culture would that society have, right? So there would be a clear-cut demarcation of jobs and all that stuff in that society, and the culture would be very different from what it is in a city like Delhi, right? And finally, what is the collective aim of society, right? So for example, today in a metro, the collective aim of society is to earn well, right? To have a very good living, right? So the entire culture is pushed towards earning more. So there is a culture of job switch, right? If you can put it in perspective, people are switching their jobs very frequently, right? So there is a culture of job switch, which earlier it was not, right? Similarly, if you see some Western countries, let's take an example of Germany. With the advent of Hitler, the culture of the entire society became very aggressive, right? Because the aim of the society was to invade various countries and to have a single control. Similarly, if you talk about Timur or maybe some foreign invader in India, their culture or their society was formed on the basis of invasion, right? They want to invade India and they want to plunder it, and they want to actually have a supreme control over the entire region, right? Whereas if you look at Hinduism or Sanatan Dharam, whatever you want to call it, the culture was very much towards liberation, or very much towards mukti. So that was the common aim of the society. So even in our doctrines or even in our temple arts, you would see that the culture was they were formed because of this culture. So there are, for example, temple of 5 elements in South India, right? So that was formed keeping in mind the collective aim of society, which was mukti, or liberation from the circle of life and death. And finally, religious philosophies and other philosophical influences, right? So Socrates influenced Greek society and formed entirely a different culture. Similarly, a Shankar formed a different culture by propagating Advait, right? So these religious philosophies, so there was a philosophy called Nyaya which influenced society in a different way. There was philosophy called Sankhya which influenced society in a different way. So religious philosophies that were prevalent at that time. So today in Gurgaon there is no religious philosophy as such. So I would say that money has become the religion, or to earn a good livelihood has become the religion, and the philosophy of today's era is consumerism, right? So that is influencing the culture of metro cities. So this is how you build around any culture. We are discussing this so that you would be able to actually remember various tenets of cultures. Once we go deep into each culture, we would be discussing some facts of each culture, and we would be discussing the rationale why a particular culture was like that, right? So these pointers would help you actually formalize your answer and actually help you remember all this stuff. So now the other element, which is art. What is art? Simple. If you ask yourself what is art, it is simply defined as manifestation of our culture, right? So manifestation, so culture is a very underlying theme. It's very subtle in a way, right? You cannot say that this is our culture. The culture is like a DNA, right? So you cannot say my skin is my DNA, but DNA form your skin is formed because of DNA. So culture is like a DNA of a society. And what is then art? Art is manifestation of our culture. So how do we manifest our culture? For example, how do we eat? That's a manifestation of our culture. For example, in Thailand or in Japan, they still eat sitting down on the floor, right? In Western countries, they eat on a dining table. In India, particularly in South India, they still sit on the floor and eat with their hands, right? So that's manifestation of our culture, right? Similarly, in West Bengal, you would see there would be a thali kind of culture if food is concerned, right? So that's the manifestation again. So how do we manifest? We manifest through writing, which means we would talk about literature. We manifest through drawings, which means paintings, murals. Drawings can be further extended to photography as well as cinema. So in drawings, I would talk about paintings, murals, photography, and cinema. Then through carvings, so there are statues and seals and temples and all that stuff, which we would discuss. Then through architecture, again temples and buildings. Through performances, dance, music, so we can here again put cinema, plays, right? Through communication, so languages and scripts, right? So how do we develop a particular language? For example, Urdu was a new language which was developed with the influence of Persian and Hindi, right? So that we would again discuss. And through what we eat, so culinary art and food, again an important part of culture. What kind of food we eat? For example, in Punjab we eat very rich food, whereas in South India the food is not that heavy on your belly, right? So what influences that? Again, Punjab is wheat eating, whereas South India is rice eating. Why this happens, right? So again, this is the manifestation of geography, right? Where we are living, what kind of agriculture we are professing, and all that stuff. But it nevertheless is part of our culture. And then through what we wear, so textile and handicraft. So a Chanderi silk is developed in a particular region and not in some other region. Why it happened, right? So what was the social influences, or what was the culture there which led to the development of Chanderi silk? Or for that matter, why a particular kind of handicraft developed in Banaras or somewhere down south and not maybe in North India, right? So this again is manifestation of various factors which we have discussed before, which forms the culture, right? So what are the factors influencing art? Since art is manifestation of culture, thus factors influencing a culture will influence the art as well. So again, livelihood, religion, geography, social structures, rituals and customs of the society, and acceptability in a society. So acceptability in a society forms an important part of art, right? For example, let's take an example of a dance, right? So a particular dance form was not accepted in the society, and it would eventually decline, and after few years nobody would talk about that art form, right? Similarly, if we talk about hippie culture, right? Hippie culture per se, in that maybe a sexual intercourse with without marriage was acceptable, which is not acceptable in our society in general, right? So you would see the culture or the art forms of hippie society, or the culture of hippie society, was very different from what it is in normal society, right? So there would be very erotic art forms in hippie society which is not there in normal society. So acceptability, right, whether a particular art form is accepted in a society or not, is also uh, influence art, right? So that was basically about what is art, what is culture, and what are the factors which influence art and culture. So how are we going to take this course? We would discuss about Indian art and culture in general, right? We would also see some elements of international art which influenced Indian art and culture, right? So what are we going to study? We will study culture in various historical eras, various historical as well as various geographical locations, right? We would study factors which determined these cultures. So we would understand the facts and figures of that culture. For example, we would talk about the dancing dolls and all that stuff in Harappa, but we would be more interested in understanding what factors influenced these kind of figures. And then we would understand manifestations of these cultures in various forms of arts, right? So we would talk about these three things in various historical eras and in various geographical locations, so that you have a comprehensive understanding. Learning facts is important as far as prelims is concerned, because there are many factual questions, but mugging up all the facts just like that might not be possible. It might not be possible for for human memory, right? So if we try to do it through this framework, it would be much more beneficial for all of us, right? So with this I end this lecture. I hope that you enjoyed this and you learned few new things through this lecture. In the next lecture we would take up one historical era and understand what was culture there, what kind of art did they manifest, and what are the factors which actually influenced that particular era, right? So thanks for watching this video and all the best.